Good afternoon from the 1011 Now streaming studio. I'm Danielle Shenk, and welcome to Inside the Story with the Nebraska Examiner, a nonprofit independent news source committed to providing important news and reports for our state. Today, we're sitting down with Zach Wendling to discuss Nebraska's ballot measure petition signatures. Thanks for being here, Zach.
Thanks so much for having me, Danielle.
Alrighty, so Zach, this year has been quite the year for ballot measures, as we were kind of talking about here before we got on the stream. What's made it so historic?
Yeah, so it's really a year where Nebraskans and really citizen-led petitions have, in addition to a very contentious election cycle for Nebraska, where we have both Senate candidates on the ballot, all three House races, and many down ballot candidates, we now have six ballot measures that are going to voters already in early voting and here in less than 2 weeks on Election Day. And for those six ballot measures, in addition to a seventh kind of related school choice measure, there were 700,000 signatures verified statewide across those ballot measures. And, in 2020 and 2022, we didn't reach that number. In 2020, we also had six ballot measures, but it was under 600,000 verified signatures. So it's really a year where Nebraskans are looking to have their voices heard and weigh in on issues and wanting to bring it directly to the ballot box themselves.
Right. And so not only has there been a record number of signatures, but the costs involved has also been quite historic as well.
Yeah, as of October 1st, we were well over $20 million raised and $14 million spent. We'll be getting more filings in the next week or so, and we'll see how much more has been spent in the final month of campaigning. But we're looking at multi-million dollar campaigns for, I think, every single one of these ballot measures. Yeah.
Wow. And we've mentioned that we have six, but there's a couple that were working on some constitutional amendments that didn't submit some petitions. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, we also had the Epic Option campaign led by some of our own state senators. State Senator Steve Erdman and State Senator Steve Halloran were some of the leading voices behind that to get rid of all taxes except for a consumption tax, as well as the Choose Life Now ballot measure, which would have extended personhood or equal protections under the 14th Amendment to embryos and fetuses under the law.
Alrighty. And now you have several maps in your article as well, including one that has several nifty maps. What's this? What's this one that we're looking at here on screen?
Yeah, so this first one here really shows our Nebraska Constitution not only tells circulators how many signatures they have to gather statewide, it also tells them they need signatures in 2/5 of the counties statewide. And with 93 counties, they need 38 counties of at least 5% of registered voters in that county. And this map here really shows the counties where that happened. The ones that are more green are the ones where they had less petitions hit that 5% threshold. But the very dark blue ones are where all six ballot measures qualified. And of course, all Nebraskans will be weighing in on these ballot measures. But this kind of shows the strategy and the tactics of where were people going to get those 38 counties or, the overage to make sure they had enough signatures and enough counties to make it on the ballot.
Yeah, and so obviously Southeast Nebraska is pretty active, but then there's that funny looking little belt right there in the middle
There
of
is.
Nebraska.
Yeah, so right from the east into the west in the little sand hills, there's a way that, a lot of petitions went through that area or sometimes along the border with Kansas to make sure that they kind of had those as well, kind of the population areas we might not think of going along I-80, but some of the smaller counties that they managed to get enough voters in those to hit the 38 county mark. So it's information that I'll continue to be looking at for the Examiner. I'm sure other reporters will, but kind of looking at where are the counties where the 38 ones they go to are consistently being hit.
Mm-hmm. And now you've also broken down the ballot measures that we have for this year, all six of them. And we won't dive into every detail today, but we'll touch on some of the highlights. And so starting with the medical marijuana initiatives, what stood out the most for you?
Yeah, so the medical cannabis measures, there are two of them in this election cycle. And really that stems that this is the third election cycle in a row where the Nebraskans for Medical Marijuana campaign are seeking ballot access. This is the farthest that campaign has ever gone. And while there are ongoing legal challenges in Lancaster County, this is the first year that Nebraskans will weigh in on these full medical cannabis measures. The first one is the Patient Protection Act, which is legalizing it for patients and providers. And the second one is really a regulatory regime with a commission to oversee it. And really what stood out, is it has that line and it also has the Kansas area where it went to the Sandhills and also down south. And Washington County was actually its highest concentration of signatures there, the darkest blue at 11% of those registered voters. So it kind of just shows it is more in eastern Nebraska with the kind of population centers of Lincoln and Omaha, but it did go all over the state. It's one of the three campaigns that hit every single county and got signatures all across the state. And while it didn't qualify in every county at the 5%, they still had the second most counties qualified of all the petitions for their campaign.
Right. And so this week, or I guess leading up to the election, is when they're supposed to talk about these lawsuits, or am I getting that mixed up with something else?
No, you're right. So here in Lancaster County, they will start their trial on Tuesday. It could last 3 days, starting that Tuesday, potentially extending into the Thursday or Friday, skipping Wednesday for a prior engagement for the judge with a different legal case. And really what that will determine in two phases, the first one being, are there enough questionable signatures? And phase two, if it proceeds that far, can the ballot measures resurrect some signatures and ensure they still hit about 85,000 valid signatures statewide? And so this is being led by John Keane, a former state senator and former member of the State Board of Health, and our own Secretary of State, Bob Evnen, who was named in the lawsuit and then decided to challenge some of his signatures of his own with an ongoing investigation from Attorney General Mike Hilgers.
Yeah, and so quite the drama with this ballot initiative stuff. And so this lawsuit in the trial is supposed to, did you say that it would end this week too? Or is it
would
possible?
end, yeah. So the first phase, which is really do they have, the signatures or are enough questionable, that really ends next Friday with the trial. We don't for sure know yet when the judge will rule. Of course, election day is November 5th. Next Friday is November 1st. So it is a very tight timeline that the judge may decide to hold off on her ruling until after the election. Part of that could be that if it's not approved at the ballot box, it kind of makes the whole case moot. But polling and different year over year has kind of shown support for medical cannabis statewide and has in multiple liberal or conservative states nationwide. So it'll be an interesting watch on the ballot box, hoping, of course, that we get the results that night. As far as we know, the election results will be publicized for all 6 ballot measures, and we will be watching it closely.
Yeah, and I mean, how odd that the possibility of, Nebraskans voting on this, approving it, and then maybe courts are saying, no, we're going to back up and it's not true, or
right. And there's always the backup of the legislature that it can always do their own laws, their own proposals. So we'll also be watching in January, depending on how these legal challenges play out. Do lawmakers decide to pick it up on their own too?
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the dueling abortion measures, as if we didn't already have enough drama with the medical marijuana lawsuits and all of that stuff. Now we have dueling abortion measures that have both made it and are going head to head for November.
Right. So we have the abortion rights constitutional amendment from the Protect Our Rights campaign, which would enshrine a right to abortion up to fetal viability as determined by a treating healthcare practitioner. And we have the abortion restrictions constitutional amendment, which really enshrine current Nebraska law of a 12-week abortion limit that most abortions could not be performed after the first trimester into the Constitution. It sets a ceiling, but not a floor. The legislature could come back and outright ban abortion, with the exception of life to the mother, sexual assault, and incest.
Mm-hmm. And so with these measures, I mean, I know some of us who have been watching TV quite a bit have noticed, there's been quite a few commercials related to these 2 ballot measures. And quite honestly, some of them are a little confusing. So can you kind of reiterate what the differences are between these 2?
Yeah, so Initiative Measure 434 is from the Protect Women and Children campaign. It would enshrine current restrictions on abortion into the Nebraska Constitution. It makes it harder to change year over year. Abortion has been an issue that is perennially legislated in the Nebraska legislature, and this would enshrine a 12-week restriction on abortion with those three exceptions, with the exceptions language in the Constitution. 439, the Protect Our Rights campaign, which is the abortion rights amendment, is that fetal viability, which is about 22 to 24 weeks according to different medical standards and scientific standards. And it would also, put that in the Nebraska Constitution and take away the current law and restrictions on abortion currently.
Mm-hmm. And looking at the two maps that you have for both of them, quite a big difference between what you see for the Protect Our Rights with mostly towards
Yes.
eastern Nebraska, and then with the Protect Women and Children, it's like mass towards the west and almost all of Nebraska, pretty
Yeah,
with all the
and
colors.
right. And what's just so interesting is the Protect Our Rights campaign got started in last October. And so they kind of had 5 or 6 months ahead of when Protect Women and Children got started, which really started out of concern from some conservative lawmakers, of course, U.S. Senator Pete Ricketts, that the fetal viability amendment, in their view, went too far and wasn't good enough for them. And they wanted to put a different ballot measure up to voters. And they ended up I believe it was between March and July, managed to also get a very similar amount of signatures validated. I will say that signature verification ceases when it hits over 10% of its goal. So it's possible that the maps would have been a little bit different for that, including, potentially bluer counties in these maps. But yeah, I mean, Protect Women and Children went to some of those smaller counties out west. That dark blue spot around 30% is Hooker County in central Nebraska. And so that's where they got 30% of registered voters in that county. And they qualified 5% of registered voter signatures in 86 counties. Protect Our Rights got the 5% threshold in 47 of the counties.
Wow. And so I know there is a scenario here where both of them could maybe potentially pass. And I know
That's
anything can
right.
really happen. So what would happen if that does become the case?
Yeah, so this isn't as clear, and the reason for that is we just haven't had an instance like this in Nebraska with that constitutional and state law provision since it was first enacted around 1912 or earlier, based on our reporting. And so, according to Secretary of State Bob Ebden, what he told my colleague at the Nebraska Examiner is that decision will be left up to Governor Jim Pillen. We're still looking into whether that is still the case and trying to look into what other states have done in determining what is conflicting. Because what the Constitution says, if there are two ballot measures that are conflicting, which there has to be a legal determination that says that a part or all of the measures are conflicting, the measure that has the most affirmative votes, those conflicting parts will become law in Nebraska. So there is a scenario where Protect Our Rights and Protect Women and Children could both pass the ballot box. We won't be looking at the percentage. We will be looking at the raw affirmative votes on which measure has the most.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me. I did not mean to. You
No
took my
worries.
breath away there with all that information. No. So with that being the scenario, that's, I guess, when it comes to these commercials, they're saying not only voting for a certain measure, but also voting against, how that comes in play.
Yeah, because, since it is only the raw affirmative votes, the percentage doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It will, of course, matter of getting above the nays or the yays. But really what matters at the end of the day, because these are conflicting and both have polled according to, I believe it was Nebraska Public Media had polling just a couple weeks ago, both of them had more than 50% in polling. So it really might come down to which one gets the most affirmative votes. And we likely might not know on election night which of them will become law. It really comes likely to court battles, likely to executive action from the governor, Evnen. We really will see in the months ahead what comes.
Interesting. And so moving on to paid sick leave now, is there anything that you'd like to highlight about this measure?
And I think what paid sick leave was really interesting. This would enshrine a minimum level of paid sick leave for full-time employees based on how many employees businesses have in Nebraska. This one, really what stood out is it had that line heading into the Sandhills, But it also, if they went to a county to get signatures, they qualified that county. You kind of see the most came from Douglas County, and they turned their signatures in a couple weeks early or a week early as well this summer. And they just qualified which counties they went to and which they prioritized resources. I have not directly talked to the campaigns about their strategy yet. We are hoping to do that after the election and kind of seeing how the election results shape out. But I mean, what it really shows is in eastern Nebraska and in that Sandhills area, they really centralized their resources and spent some time in those regions.
Mm-hmm. And now, lastly, we also have the support our schools referendum. And so, is there anything noteworthy in the data about this one?
Yeah, so the LB 1402 partial repeal, which would take away a $10 million annual appropriation to pay for education scholarships or vouchers to non-public schools in Nebraska, really went over all over the state too, but kind of in a reverse outcome as the Protect Women and Children campaign. Referendums have the shortest time frame of to a different, it's tied to 90 days after a legislature adjourns rather than a specific time before an election. And this one really came along the outer edges of Nebraska, not so much in Lincoln and Omaha, but they really centralized kind of their resources in that less than 90-day time frame along the borders of Kansas, along Wyoming and South Dakota, and really got some western Nebraska, also south central Nebraska, and just really different counties than the other petitions got as well.
Yeah. And can you remind us, this one also had some drama with it where they had
Yes.
passed a law in the legislature and then had this referendum come about. So for voters who might be watching this, can you kind of explain what had happened here with this referendum?
Yeah, so LB 1402 took away LB 753, which was passed in 2023, and enacted Nebraska's first school choice legislation on this level, which was the direct appropriation to other organizations to provide scholarships or vouchers to students to attend these private schools. 47 other states have similar, 48 other states have similar programs as this. And this was really the first for Nebraska. And the Support Our Schools campaign launched their campaign even before the legislature during 2023. They got enough signatures and they put it on the ballot. But because LB 1402, which was passed in April of this year on the last day of the legislative session, takes away LB 753 in just a week here, next Thursday, those tax credits will officially go away that were approved in 753 for these scholarships. Secretary of State Bob Ebden decided that both didn't need to be on the ballot, or at least 753 didn't need to be on the ballot. And then LB 1402, at its referendum campaign, also went through legal challenges that survived with the Nebraska Supreme Court. And now we're here voting on LB 1402 alone.
Alrighty. Quite a bit to go through from this article. Obviously, people can dive into it a little bit deeper, but is there anything else that you would like to add here today?
I think what's just really interesting is the amount of Nebraskans who have gotten involved and got their voices heard. We'll continue with the Nebraska Examiner, and I'm sure other outlets here in Nebraska looking into ballot measures. But for Nebraskans who have questions about the process or have any findings that they see in the data as well, always feel free to reach out to us at the Examiner or at your local reporters, because it's all citizen led. It's all about Nebraskans at the end of the day.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Thanks so much for joining us here today, Zach.
Thanks, Danielle.
Well, for more details, you can find Wendling's article breaking down petition signatures for Nebraska 2024 ballot measures on 1011now.com or nebraskaexaminer.com. For more updates and news, you can visit our website. And from our newsroom to wherever you are, see you on the next stream.